Fighters Uncaged is the worst fighting game that I have personally ever played, and it was a launch title for the Xbox 360 Kinect, and to this day, it's a Kinect exclusive, and seeing how bad this game is, it's likely for the best. Now, I do like to start reviews like this on a positive note, so I will say that the graphics weren't that bad. They weren't stellar, like in Tekken Tag 2 or DOA 5, but they were good enough for a Kinect game. That out of the way, let's get into the bad stuff. Let's start off with the story, shall we? Or the lack of a story. The story is not revealed through cutscenes, not through notes, or letters in the game, but in the manual. You had to read the manual to know pretty much anything about the story. So if you bought the game digitally or used without a manual, tough stuff, you'll never know what this game is about. But even with the manual, the story is insanely basic. You're street fighting to raise money for your dad, who's over his head in gambling debt. Woohoo! And I won't lie, that's not the worst story I've ever seen, but it makes no sense gameplay-wise. Okay, you're street fighting for money. If that's the case, then why is nobody watching the fights in the backgrounds? Maybe I didn't get far enough to unlock an arena with an audience, but not one of the fights I took part in had a single onlooker. So who's paying to watch these fights? And the fights take place in the most random places, like a farmhouse or in the middle of a public park. I'm no genius, but I'm 99% sure having a brutal bare-knuckle brawl in a public park is not a good idea for so many reasons. Shifting over to talk about gameplay, we gotta start with the tutorial. It was insanely long and drawn out and took at least half an hour to finish, so Fighters Uncaged got off to a slow start. But once you get through the borefest of the tutorial, you then start the only other mode in this game, the campaign. There's no single fight mode, no time trial, no arcade, no multiplayer, nothing, just the campaign. Alright, so you boot up the campaign and you start fighting. Oh dear, the fighting. This game will mentally break anyone with any martial arts training because of just how wrong it is and how wrong it feels. And look, I'm no black belt, but I did take karate classes for several years, and Fighters Uncaged is a complete and total mockery of everything that is martial arts. Now, to be fair, I was never in a street fight like in this game, but my buddies and I spent enough hours sparring that I can tell you this game is just wrong. But you know, I highly doubt this game was intended for people with any martial arts training, so let's just pretend for a minute that I never received any training and I have zero experience at all, okay? So on paper, the way this game works is that you do a variety of punches and kicks to knock out your opponent. But we're talking the Xbox 360 Kinect here. The thing really only works when it wants to, and I don't know how many times the thing just would not register my moves at all. Now, funny enough, whenever I would go to record, the game was more likely to work like it was supposed to. It's like this game knew that I was going to make a video where I trash talked it, so it was on its best behavior whenever I was recording. But whenever I wasn't recording, Fighters Uncaged either didn't function or barely functioned, as it wouldn't read blocks, kicks, punches, etc., or would have delays, or sometimes even misread in my favor. Like, I would punch and the game would register a kick, which do more damage than punches. Needless to say, the controls were a mess, as is the case with most Kinect games. I've actually played 4 Kinect games published by Ubisoft, this being one of them, and 3 were absolute messes, with the 4th, Your Shape Fitness Evolved 2012, being the only one that really worked properly, but we're getting a little off track here. Back to combat. On paper, you could block and dodge punches and kicks. In reality, forget blocking punches, it's not gonna happen and you're gonna get popped. Now sometimes the game would register dodges, or I wouldn't dodge and the game would read me as dodging anyways, and blocking kicks sometimes worked. Blocking kicks worked by raising your leg really high, like if you were power walking, and I'd say that it had maybe a 40 to 60% chance of working, especially since the game would sometimes enter slow-mo so that you could block kicks easier. But even then, it just largely came down to whether or not the Kinect wanted to work. Now apart from punches and kicks, you could also do sweep attacks, headbutts, combos, and blinding attacks. Now, I don't really know how these work, and I usually only pulled them off when the game misread what I was doing. Like, I'd try to throw a punch and then somehow do a headbutt, or I'd try to kick and sweep my opponent off their feet. Wrapping up the gameplay itself, enemies love bunny hopping around and dodging like crazy, and this wound up being more annoying than anything else and is super unrealistic based off my experience in sparring. I mean, sure, we'd dodge attacks sometimes, but more often we'd either block or hit each other. And adding a note here, to help follow YouTube community guidelines, my friends and I always wore foam safety armor while sparring, and we were never trying to hurt each other. It was all for training and good fun. Real fighting is bad and should be avoided. Okay, that out of the way, I would like to discuss the camera angle. It was awful, and blocked part of your field of vision, which made blocking attacks even harder. I think Fighters Uncaged could have benefited from pulling an arcade punch out here by making your character at least semi-transparent so that he wouldn't be blocking your FOV, but nope, he's solid and makes it harder to see your opponent. Lovely. Speaking of opponents, this title offers several foes to duke it out against, and they're spread out among 3 weight classes: light, medium, and heavy. Although outside of cosmetics, I didn't notice any major difference in the 3 classes. Now I will admit that some of the enemies actually have decent designs and are all voiced, so that's something, I guess, and there's an achievement for beating each opponent 20 times. And I reckon that wraps up gameplay, and honestly, everything I've said up to this point isn't what makes Fighters Uncaged a truly awful game, believe it or not. Everything I've so far discussed just makes the game on the very low end of decent, but what makes this game awful is the progression system. You know how in pretty much every fighting game ever, you win a match to progress in the game and that's it? Fighters Uncaged isn't like that. Instead of a normal progression system, where you simply win a fight to advance, you have to get a good grade on your fight to advance. I'm gonna try and keep this explanation as simple as possible, but you collect something called crowns to advance in the game, and crowns are earned by getting a high score in a match, but you first have to get a score of over 6,000 to earn any crowns, so even if you win a match and your score is under 6,000, you don't progress in the game. At all. But let's say you win a match and your score is 8,000 and you earn 20 crowns from this. Okay, cool, but if you want to earn more crowns, you'll have to go back and beat your high score. You can't just get 8,000 points again and get 20 more crowns. No, you have to go and get a better score if you want to progress. So basically, you'll likely be forced to do the same fights over and over again to earn enough crowns in order to move up in the game. And I should note that collecting enough crowns to progress in the game moves you up to a new difficulty setting. But once you unlock a new difficulty, you cannot go back to an easier one without completely restarting the game. This is just so stupid, so dumb, so half-washed. I don't even know what to call it, honestly. The fact that you can theoretically win a million fights back to back without losing once and never progress is just bad. Oh, I guess I should probably discuss how you actually earn points. It's based off a number of things, like how much time and health you have when a battle ends and the variety of moves that you used. So if you barely win a match with 2 seconds on the clock and 3 HP left, you're barely going to get any points. Like, imagine all the times in a game where you've barely scraped by a tough boss with 1 HP left or something like that. Imagine if the game then said, sorry, not good enough, gotta do it again. You would likely rage quit and or sell the game because this is just dumb. And if everything I haven't said isn't bad enough, this fighting game only has one playable character. One. I mean, sure, it fits the story, I guess, but why couldn't there be a free play mode where I could play as someone else? What kind of fighting game has a one character roster? For crying out loud, even the budget 360 arcade fighter Girl Fight has a heftier roster than that. To top everything else off, the sound effects are decent at best, and apart from the main menu theme, the soundtrack is barely present. Fighters Uncaged is just a horribly designed game in my opinion. About the only thing I can really give it is that this is a decent exercise game, and you will work up a sweat playing it, but there are simply better options if you're only looking for an active gaming experience, and I give this title a 4.1 out of 10 by my grade scale. I wonder how many people were turned away from the Kinect because of this game. Like, imagine you picked up a Kinect day 1 and this was your first experience with the device. You'd likely never touch it again thanks to this sour experience. How Microsoft let this game slide, I have no idea. Now, in the developer's defense, I read that this game was developed in about 10 months, and it definitely shows, as it's likely hard to make a quality product on new hardware with less than a year to make it, but that doesn't change the fact that this is a cruddy game. And believe it or not, this title somehow managed to get a sequel for the Xbox One Kinect, a launch title called Fighter Within, and from what I read, it's even worse than the first game somehow. Whew. This has been an interesting script to write, and I haven't covered a game this bad in a long time. But believe it or not, this isn't even my least favorite Kinect game. That title goes to Darts vs. Zombies, and my review for that game will be in the end card if you wish to check it out. Now, my regular viewers will know that I usually recommend a similar game at the end of my reviews. But I don't really have any similar games to suggest here, as there were very few fighting games on the Kinect, so I'm just going to say to play Dead or Alive 5 and Tekken Tag 2 if you want a good Xbox 360 fighting game. Or, if you're looking for a decent Kinect game, I'd say try Kinect Joyride. As a side note apart from my review, the next Kinect game I'll likely cover will be either Rise of Nightmares, one of only 2 M-rated games on the Kinect, or Star Wars Kinect, so maybe subscribe if you want to see that video whenever it comes out. And for any newcomers here, I mostly review and discuss video games, with a large focus on zombie and horror titles. But I'm down to talk about any genre of game really, so feel free to leave a review request in the comments. But please note that I will never guarantee a requested video. As far as our Bible verses of the day, I read Acts 10, 34 through 35 NIV. Then Peter began to speak. I now realize how true it is that God does not show favoritism, but accepts from every nation the one who fears him and does what is right. Alrighty, I reckon that's my vid for today. Thanks for watching and for tolerating my horrible narration, I really do appreciate it. Like always, none of my content is ever made by AI, and I do not consent to my voice and likeness being modified, altered, and copied by AI in any way. Hope y'all have a good one. God bless. Thanks again for watching. Peace. But even with the manual, the story is insanely basic. Your street fart